Hello and welcome to the Homeless Consultant channel. My name is Paul B. I am the Homeless Consultant. And in the interest of time, let's jump right into today's topic, shall we? The topic is how to steal an American election in 13 easy steps. Step number 1. Infiltrate and or take control over the mainstream media, particularly the news media. Step number 2. Have that media prime the pump in advance of the election by repeatedly asking the legitimate candidate, the candidate who you do not want to win, who you want to cheat out of victory. Ask that candidate questions like, will you concede the election and leave office if you don't win? Step number 3. Have millions of pre-fabricated fraudulent ballots ready for rapid distribution to all relevant polling areas across the state in question. Where would you get these pre-fabricated fraudulent ballots? Well, there's very many ways you can do it. You can do ballot harvesting like Ilhan Omar was caught doing on video. Watch the Project Veritas video of her campaign harvesting ballots illegally. You could, resurrect the dead, people who maybe died 100 years ago or 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, put a ballot in their name. Or you could just sit down in a bedroom and print out a couple million ballots. Step number 4. On election day, stop counting votes after the polls close as soon as it becomes evident roughly how many votes the real winner, the legitimate candidate, is going to receive. So in other words, you let people vote up until the polls close, and then once the polls close, you proceed with the counting until you can mathematically derive pretty accurately what the final results are going to be, so that you know how many votes the real winner is going to have. Step number 5. Calculate the number of fraudulent votes that need to be dumped into the polls to ensure that the illegitimate candidate has enough votes to exceed what you estimate the legitimate candidate will have. By a comfortable margin, of course, but not too much, because you don't want to raise any suspicion. Step number 6. When you're ready, when you have that number, call the distribution center and order the number of votes that you need. They can be delivered within a couple of hours. Step number 7. Prohibit certified poll watchers and other people from observing what is going on in the vote counting area. Don't let them see what's going on. Step number 8. Dump the fraudulent ballots into the mix. It's that simple. Step number 9, resume the vote counting. Step number 10, instruct the controlled news media to announce the illegitimate candidate as the winner at the earliest opportunity. Step number 11, instruct the controlled news media to accuse the legitimate winner of being a, quote, sore loser or a threat to democracy if they refuse to concede. Step number 12. Instruct the illegitimate fraudulent candidate to assert themselves as the rightful winner early on, as if nothing unusual at all had happened. And finally, step number 13. Sit back and watch the masses believe that the illegitimate candidate has been elected. If the media never tells the masses that there were valid questions of potential fraud about the election, then there's no way for the masses to have any foggy idea that there were valid questions of potential fraud raised in the election, is there? Because the only way they would know it is if the media told them so, right? The masses will believe that the election was fair, even if they don't like the results, even if the person they didn't want to win wins. If they believe there are no valid objections to the election, the vast majority of people will accept it. And that's it. That's how you steal an American election. Criminally, fraudulently, and treacherously. Treason is a capital offense. Let me go through these 13 steps one more time, but I'm going to add a little something to each one that might bring this into a little more focus for you. Step number 1 was infiltrate and take control over the mainstream media, particularly the news media. Now let me tell you what would happen in a legitimate, non-fraudulent election. In a non-fraudulent election, they crucially depend upon a reliable and incorruptible objective press. You see the difference there? One of them requires a reliable, incorruptible objective press. The other one requires an infiltrated and controlled press. See, that's the difference between the two. Number 2, have that media prime the pump by repeatedly asking questions. Like, will you concede the election and leave office if you don't win the election? In a legitimate election, that would never happen. Why? Because it's irrelevant. Where in United States history have you seen a candidate who just chains himself to the desk in the Oval Office and says, I'm not leaving, I'm not leaving? When has that ever happened? The closest to it was Al Gore, who refused to concede the election in 2000. Or George Bush, if you want to put it that way. They were both that way. And it should have been that way, because nobody knew who really won. You see, the reason that they prime the pump, the reason that they ask these questions in the first place, they go up to Donald Trump and they ask the question, will you concede the election? Will you leave office if you lose? They're not looking for an answer to that question. It's the act of asking the question that plants the seeds in people's minds, people who don't think. It plants seeds in their minds that, hey, this guy might not leave. He might declare martial law. He might bring in the military. I saw a tweet where this Andrew Weissman guy, he calls himself an attorney. I haven't checked to see whether that's legit or not, because his tweet was not up to the standards I would expect of someone who could conceivably get through law school. The thinking skills weren't there, but he was saying something about how since President Trump had he had fired, after the election, he had fired one of his military leaders and put in what he called a patsy or something like that, that he says, this is serious. He was implying that Donald Trump's somehow going to take military control over the nation. And, I tweeted back and I said, when a homeless guy understands the concept of checks and balances in the United States better than a guy who at least claims to be an attorney, this Andrew Weissman, I don't know. Something's wrong. If you think there's any American soldier who's going to take part in that just because they're told to from above, you don't understand how the United States of America works. So step number 2, the whole purpose of the media asking questions like that is to plant seeds of doubt in advance in the masses, the voters' minds. They're not even looking for an answer. They could care less. It's an irrelevant question. It has no business being asked. And in a legitimate election, that question would never, ever be asked. Step number 3, have millions of prefabricated fraudulent ballots ready for rapid distribution to all relevant polling areas across the state in question. In other words, you have them ready to go. You have them in the boxes. They look legitimate. You have them pre-positioned in various places so that any city in that state that needs fraudulent ballots can have them within a couple of hours. All right? In a legitimate election, what would happen? There wouldn't be any fraudulent ballots. There wouldn't be any distribution center. There wouldn't be any organized criminal racket set up to distribute a bunch of fraudulent ballots. You see, because that would be a legitimate election. You see how that works, right? So, a corollary to that would be, if these fraudulent ballots exist, then by definition, it's a fraudulent election. Because a legitimate election wouldn't have some distribution center for fraudulent ballots. Number 4, on election day, stop counting votes after the polls close. In other words, after everyone who can legally vote does. Then stop counting the votes as soon as it becomes evident roughly how many votes the real winner is going to receive if you proceeded with a legitimate election. So let's say you feel that this person's going to have, 2,500,000 votes in this state. All right? What would you do in a legitimate election? Well, in a legitimate election, you wouldn't stop counting the votes, right? You would just keep counting the votes steadily until the job is completed. And a corollary to that is that if you see an election where they stop counting the votes when it becomes obvious how many votes the winner's going to have, you're probably looking at a fraudulent election, because in a legitimate election you wouldn't stop counting the votes. Do you understand what I just said? It's pretty simple. Step number 5, calculate the number of fraudulent ballots that need to be dumped into the polls to ensure that your illegitimate candidate has enough votes to win. In a legitimate election, this is just non-applicable. It isn't even relevant, because there are no fraudulent ballots. There's no fraud in a legitimate election. Step number 6, call the distribution center to order the number of fraudulent votes that you need so that they can be delivered within a couple of hours to your polling area. In a legitimate election, that doesn't happen, folks. You only set up a distribution for fraudulent ballots in a fraudulent election, not in a legitimate election. It's pretty simple. Step number 7, prohibit certified poll watchers and others from observing what is happening in the vote counting area. What happens in a legitimate election? In a legitimate election, that would not happen, that could not happen, it would never be tolerated, and if anyone even tried it, heads would roll. Because those certified poll watchers are there to ensure that there is no fraud. And it makes you ask the question, why would anybody running a legitimate election prohibit certified poll watchers from watching the ballots being counted? You see the difference between a legitimate election and a fraudulent one, right? Step number 8, dump the fraudulent ballots into the mix. What would happen in a legitimate election? Nothing. It's irrelevant. It's non-applicable. There wouldn't be any fraudulent ballots. Step number 9, resume the vote counting now that you've dumped your fraudulent ballots in there. What would happen in a legitimate election at that phase? Well, it would never happen, because you would never stop counting in the first place if it was legitimate, would you? There's no reason to stop, because you're not going to introduce fraudulent ballots, so you wouldn't stop counting like Pennsylvania and Michigan and so many others did, would you? Step number 10, instruct the controlled news media to announce the illegitimate candidate as the winner at the earliest opportunity. Okay? By doing that, again, you're playing mind games with the people, with the voters. You're planting seeds in their mind that, oh my gosh, this guy won. Whether you're in favor of them or you are against them, in your mind you've got this feeling all of a sudden like, okay, well, this person won. I don't understand it. Or you might be on their side and you're like, all right, they won. But either way, in your mind, in the mind of the voters out there, is planted this seed of idea that this person actually won the election. But what happens in a legitimate election at that phase? Well, in a legitimate election, the role of the news media as a public institution, not part of government, but a public institution, their role is to be a watchdog. A legitimate media would demand a full count of all legitimate votes, and they would demand that all illegitimate, fraudulent votes are thrown out before there is a winner announced. That's what a watchdog does. That's what a legitimate media would do in a legitimate election. You see, in the United States of America, it is not the news media who determines or declares who the president is, who the winner is. CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, they do not declare somebody the president-elect. If you don't believe me, watch the last video I just posted. It's 1 minute long, where I created my own news network and had them declare me the president-elect. Is it really that easy? No, it's not. But look at what actually happened this time. Instead, the news media all the services kept announcing one of these candidates as the winner, even though there was questions about fraud all over the place. Step number 11, instruct the controlled news media to accuse the legitimate winner of being a, quote, sore loser, or even a threat to democracy if they refuse to concede. In other words, you're going to put public pressure on the one who actually won the election, but you didn't want to, the one you're cheating. You put public pressure on them by calling them names, ad hominem attacks. Again, nothing to do with logic or reason, certainly nothing to do with law or due process according to our electoral system. It's just propaganda. It's just human manipulation. And you try to put pressure on them to concede. And even if they don't concede, it doesn't matter, because the fact that you've told them to concede so many times and they refuse to do it, in many people's eyes, makes them look like a sore loser or a threat to democracy. All right? What would happen in a legitimate election in that phase? In a legitimate election, guess what, folks? If there were any questions whatsoever about whether or not the results were true and valid, a legitimate news media would never, ever, ever criticize a candidate who just simply demands that all the legitimate votes are counted and all of the fraudulent votes are not counted. What legitimate news media would ever criticize a candidate for asking for that? That the valid votes are counted and the invalid votes are not counted. You see how simple this is when you just think about it, right? All right? I mean, the media had no problem at all with Al Gore and George Bush wanting to recount in the 2000 election, did they? And they should have recounted because it was that close. There were legitimate questions as to who really won. You didn't hear the news media picking one out. And, well, to some extent, they did pick out Gore, right? Well, interesting. Same party. Step number 12, instruct the illegitimate candidate, you know, the one who stole the election, instruct that person to assert themselves as the rightful winner, as if nothing's unusual. This is everything's perfectly normal. Nothing to see here, folks. What happens in a legitimate election, though? In a legitimate election, no legitimate candidate themselves. Look, these people are running for president of the United States, the leader of the free world. Okay, and regardless of what you think of their personality or their temperament or whatever, you don't get to that level where you even have a prayer of a chance of winning that if you haven't established yourself as at least basically competent as a human being, right? And although one of these candidates in this election is showing signs of dementia, but you know what I'm saying, you know, he has a history in government and such. In a legitimate election, no candidate, it goes against all of our traditions, it goes against our electoral system. No legitimate candidate would ever assert themselves to be the winner and start proposing to display authority in that position that they have not been officially declared yet. It goes against tradition, for one thing. Remember, part of our tradition is that famous phone call. Remember when Trump won in 2016, and everyone was waiting to hear it. Everyone's waiting for those magic words. I received a call from Secretary Clinton. And as soon as you hear that, you know it's over. Because that call is the courtesy call between two mature professionals. And if Clinton had won the election, Trump would have called her and congratulated her. It's the way it is. It's the way it's always been. It's not the way it went this time, is it? Interesting. Because what I just described is the way it happens in a legitimate election. Step number 13, sit back and watch the masses believe, not having it proved to them, but believing in a religious sense that the illegitimate candidate has been elected. Gee, why would they think that? Why would they have this belief when there's no evidence or proof of it in the real world? It's because of what the media is telling them repeatedly. And they turn the channel from CNN to Fox and they're told the same thing. And they go to MSNBC and they're told the same thing. And they go on to Twitter, and what do you know? Twitter has censored everybody who's saying anything different, so that's all they see. And then they go to Facebook, and what do you know? Facebook has censored everybody who's telling the truth, so they only see the same thing. So just like the way that you get indoctrinated into a cult, you believe that this illegitimate candidate has, in fact, been elected. Well, what happens in a legitimate election at that phase? What happens? Well, frankly, very much the same thing happens, with one big exception. The masses come to this belief on the basis of real, accurate, demonstrable information, rather than just because somebody told you so. That's the difference. That's the difference between an illegitimate, fraudulent, treasonous election and a legitimate election. Now, of course, having said all of this, it's probably not the best idea in the world to steal a presidential election from... Let me take a sip before I say this number. Probably, Stars and Stripes forever, probably not the best idea to steal a presidential election from 71 million Americans who voted legally, in good faith, and who expected that their vote was going to count no matter what the outcome was. 71 million human beings who have every moral and constitutional right to have their vote matter. It's probably not the best idea to steal the election from those people. You can view it as, I'm stealing the election from this candidate who I don't want to win. But the problem is, you're not stealing it from that candidate. You're stealing it from the American people. And as a rule, when you do that, you pay a heavy price. And that's what we're going to see coming up, folks. Because what we just witnessed in the 2020 election was nothing short of what the rest of the world, who has to deal with this kind of stupidity all the time, and we never have had to until now, the rest of the world calls this what it really is, a coup d'etat. This is treason, which is a capital offense, by the way, but we'll look at that a little later. You see, the American people are not quite... The American people do demonstrate a lot of stupidity. Stupidity is one of my existential threats to the United States, if you look at my 50 existential threats. But, having said that, remember, stupidity is learned. It doesn't mean you're inherently stupid and that you're stupid in every area of your life. No matter how dumb people might be when they're driving and doing other things, and how easily indoctrinated and fooled they are by scam artists, there's some things that are just firmly embedded in you as a human being that can't really be removed by propaganda. One of them is the fact that when you're born in a free country with free elections, and you grow up in that country and you witness free elections, when a group comes along and tries to steal the election using those 13 steps there, you know that it happened. And it is offensive to the core of your being. Now, Trump derangement syndrome changes things a little bit this year because we have never seen that kind of mental illness before in that great a number of people. People who say, well, I know Biden's corrupt to the core and probably the worst thing, this is the kind of thing that can destroy this country forever, but I just can't stand Trump, so I'm going to vote for Biden. You see, that's human stupidity. I think this person could destroy the future for my children and grandchildren, could even put the entire world at risk of tyranny as the United States declines, because I'm going to vote for this guy just because I don't like this guy. I'm not going to vote for this third person over here, or not cast a vote because I don't like either one. I'm going to vote for the person who I fear might eventually kind of bring our country down into the toilet, because I just personally don't like this guy. That's stupid. But regardless of what you did in terms of using your vote, when you put that vote, whether you're placing the vote because you want Biden to win, or you want Trump to win, or I'm placing the vote over here because I want to make sure Trump does not win, the fact is, you're placing the vote on good faith that that vote's actually going to be counted, aren't you? Are you going through all that effort and going through and get at risk of getting coronavirus? Oh my gosh, where's my mask? At the polls. Oh my gosh, the fear. I mean, if you're going to go through all that and put your life at risk, for heaven's sakes, going to the polls, It's built into the core of your being that you expect your vote to at least matter, right? But these people delegitimized every single vote in the United States of America, whether you voted for Biden, whether you voted for Trump, whether you were voting for one because you're voting against the other. It doesn't matter. Your vote became irrelevant the instant these people cheated. So it's really more than 71 million people in America, isn't it? It's about twice as many. These people cheated the American people. And the American people are going to have a reckoning. Now, to finish this up, I just wrote down some notes off the top of my head, some of the insanity that we have seen in the year 2020, to help demonstrate once again how clearly this was a stolen, fraudulent election, that it was criminal, and it needs to be dealt with as a criminal matter. And when I say criminal, yes, I mean it perfectly. I'm not just spouting out words when I throw out the word treason. What is treason? You betray your country such that the people of your country, who are your family, your national family, are going to suffer, perhaps suffer in horrifying misery. Oh, say under a socialist or communist increasingly regime or something. But at the very least, they're going to suffer from the fact that their sacred vote meant nothing. That's treason, and it's a capital offense. There was a time when people who committed that crime hung by the neck until they were dead. That was the legal process. It wasn't a lynch mob. That was the legal process through our government court system. And the end result was that they hung by the neck until they're dead. And guess what? When that happened, that person never committed treason again because they were dead. And the people over there who were thinking about committing treason thought twice about it because they saw the other person pay the price. One of my other existential threats to the United States of America is lawlessness. That's the kind of thing I was talking about. So off the top of my head, I wrote down a whole bunch of things that kind of define what this insane year of 2020 is. Remember, most people out there would agree that certainly 2020 is the most ludicrous, bat guano crazy, inexplicable year of our lifetime. But I think people who know history even understand that this one takes the cake. There really isn't a precedent for this in recorded human history. There's been some weird years out there in the past, but this one is completely bonkers. This makes no sense. The only thing that really would make sense out of it would be something like the Bible, where if you believe that we're in the end times, as the book of Revelation and the Bible would indicate, then it says the devil comes with great wrath because he knows his time is short. In other words, Satan is just a couple of years or maybe a couple decades from hell for eternity, along with all the people who follow him. And if that's the case, what do you do when you're cornered? When you corner an animal, they flip out and they're jumping all over the place. That kind of seems like what the year 2020's been, doesn't it? So I just want to remind you, before I give my last point on this with the election, I want to remind you of just some of the things that have happened in 2020 that I just wrote down off the top of my head. All right, and I'm sorry if I didn't phrase them right because of that. Mainstream media manufactured a coronavirus health scare with coverage that was similar to the coverage of 9/11. They even had running counters of the dead, the infected and the dead. They kept a running counter of people getting this disease and dying. That's freaking insane, people. That's not normal news reporting. That is fear-mongering, fundamentally. Health experts and junk scientists, watch all my junk science videos. Experts, these are hardly anything but experts. Health experts and junk scientists attributed nearly every death from nearly every cause to coronavirus. You died of cancer? Check them. Did they have Rona? Put it down as COVID related. They die of a heart attack? Did they have COVID? Put it down as COVID related. Did they smoke? Did they have COVID? Put it down as smoking related death. Oh, I'm sorry. COVID related death. I'm sorry, I mix up my junk sciences sometimes. They got it from anti-smoking is what I'm getting at. If you've watched my videos, you'd understand that COVID is anti-smoking 2.0. It's following the playbook of anti-smokers point by bullet point. coronavirus shutdowns and mask mandates in a free country, a country where all the constitutions and laws are designed to prevent the government from even having any capacity to do exactly that, to take away your freedom, to lock you down, to imprison you anywhere, whether it's in your home or elsewhere, to force you to wear underwear over your face. That lunacy, 2020, what can I say? And yet, when you look at the numbers, the number of people dying from coronavirus are, again, sorry folks, but basically not a whole lot different than the flu. Not a whole lot different than the number of people who die in these little babies every day, or every year. Yet nobody's doing anything about this. Nobody's banning cars. I don't even see police out there ticketing people who go zooming by me at 20, 30 miles faster than I'm traveling at the speed limit. No one's doing anything about that, are they? Yeah. The flu? When did we have all these shutdowns en masse over the flu? The flu's been around forever. They say COVID, they call it now, is going to be around forever. Interesting. Interesting. And yet, the number of deaths from it is way less than 1% of the people who get it, which the people who get it is a fairly trivial minority of people anyway. Most people who get it either don't even know they had it, it's so trivial, or like our president, our 74-year-old president, he gets it, and 3 days later he's up and running like a racehorse again. That's the deadly plague they've been doing all this stuff for. The shutdowns allowed liquor stores and abortion clinics to remain open, but smoke shops had to close, and churches had to close. Oh, and schools had to close. Because it's not very important that our children be educated, is it? An educated population, might, I don't know, they might even recognize fraud in an election when it happens, if they were educated, if they could critically think, if they knew anything about history, like the history of how this exact model of fraudulent election was used to create the Soviet Union. Where do you think all those countries came from with freely elected dictators? Did you think all those people actually elected those dictators? Or do you think some fraud was involved? What we just witnessed is basically what the Stasi would do. Basically what the Soviet Union would do to take over their countries legitimately. Let's see. So liquor stores and abortion clinics open, smoke shops and churches closed, no school, friends, no school. So all those kids are losing 1 year of their life where they're learning the social skills, and they will never ever get that back. This entire generation, for their entire lives, will be lacking seriously in their capacity to interact socially with other people. The consequences of that alone are going to be absolutely catastrophic to our species going forward. And the whole purpose of it was to stack the deck in an election. Nothing to do with health. Government in a free country, a government elected by the people, of the people, by the people, for the people, suddenly declares some people essential and other people non-essential. Just totally arbitrary categories. No such distinction had ever even been conceived of previous to that. There wasn't even the idea that there was that distinction, A, and B, that government had any power or authority or moral ability to declare you essential and you not essential just based on the work that you do. This is the lunacy of 2020, folks. And the people just took it. They just took it. They just accepted it. Governors' stay-at-home orders, which automatically, by definition, criminalized the homeless for simply existing. Because you see, you can't stay at home when you have no home, like the homeless. You see how that works, right? Governors like Governor Tim Walz in Minnesota don't get that rather obvious thing. Either that or they just don't care if the homeless live or die. I wonder which one it is, because I can't think of a third alternative. Can you? If you can think of a third alternative, put it in the notes. Because either, in order to affect the outcome of this election, governors like Tim Walz were willing to inherently put the lives and the well-being of all these homeless people at risk, targeted like a laser beam. You must stay at home, even though you don't have a home, or you're going to be punished. It's either that, or just to affect the outcome of an election, or he just doesn't care if the homeless live or die. Can you think of a third alternative? Put it in the comments. Maybe Governor Walz can chime in. Explain yourself, sir. I'd like to know. Stay-at-home orders. These things were extended even as the states that didn't have the stay-at-home orders had far lower numbers. Lower coronavirus infections and deaths. In other words, there was no correlation of any kind whatsoever between all these draconian measures against coronavirus and how much coronavirus there was. And even then, all the numbers that we're hearing were a bunch of myths and lies and propaganda anyway. Remember, oh, you had a heart attack and you had coronavirus. We'll put it down as coronavirus related. This thing was a fraud from the beginning, as I've been saying on this channel from the beginning, way back at the beginning of this year. But then again, I've studied junk science for 30 years, so I knew what I was looking for. Most people did not. Countless reports of coronavirus numbers being inflated. There were reports of patients being what they called murdered, and these are nurses and doctors saying it. Patients being murdered. Now, it's not like they're not like the ovens in the Holocaust or something like that, but the fact was they were using these ventilators in such a way that they pretty much knew the patient was going to die. Either to free up a bed or to be able to write down and get more money or what have you. It was just sheer insanity. It wasn't even as nefarious as that sounds, but it was, because they're basically killing patients and considering it just a cost of doing business during this horrible plague, this pandemic, which didn't really exist, did it? Governors materially responsible for the massive nursing home deaths. If there was ever a place where these deaths could have been contained or prevented, it's in these nursing homes. And yet the governors are the ones who were probably, if there was one individual in a state who could be held accountable for all these nursing home deaths, it is the governors and the way they handled it. Thank goodness the government is looking into those governors and their role in that, because a lot of people died, and the media's out there blaming Donald Trump for it the whole time. Isn't that interesting? Interesting. Throughout 2020, liberals enjoyed getting paid by the government to just sit on their butt at home all day, play video games, and smoke pot. Meanwhile, the conservatives, even the homeless ones, if you watch my videos, even the homeless conservatives, we were out there protesting and demanding to work for a living, which is our right as a human being. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. These rights are self-evident. I'm not pursuing happiness when I'm a prisoner at home or when this is my home. I take pride in working for a living, in producing something out there. And these governments were not allowing it. But the liberals loved it. Free checks, stimulus checks, unemployment, don't have to work, just get stoned all day, whatever, watch TV. Sweet. Lunacy of the year 2020. Ignorant but terrified citizens turning on each other, turning each other into authorities and going berserk, just going crazy when another human being enters their vicinity. Human beings are a social animal. If you want to know the power of propaganda and human manipulation, the power of this mass media to bend and twist people's minds, how do you take a social species and make it fear other members of its own species? I used to have guinea pigs. Among the so many things I lost when I lost my home were my pets. Guinea pigs are social animals. They love to be together and they have to be together. It kills them if they're not. And it doesn't do much better for humans either. And yet the media was able to train people to go, oh, get away from me! Get away from me! Social distancing! People to freak out just because a fellow human being walked in their vicinity. The year 2020, folks. The same fake news services on the same day. You turn on this news service at 10 a.m. and what do? They show a video of conservatives gathering in protest of stay-at-home orders, and everyone's complaining and calling them, accusing them of murdering everybody's grandmother, and they're spreading the disease and super spreaders and all this. That's at 10 a.m. Then at noon, they're showing video of all these rioters and protesters, these liberals out there, just as much as anyone else, wearing masks, not wearing masks, interacting with each other, bleeding because they're cutting themselves as they break all this glass, shooting each other, gathering together, and not a word about spreading the disease. Not a word about it. On the same network, just within an hour or two of each other, or in the same newspaper. Page 1 has a picture of a conservative meeting and they're complaining about them spreading the disease. Flip a few pages later, there's a picture of thousands of liberals getting together. Not a word about the coronavirus. Do you see what has been going on in 2020? Democrats begin to cheer. These people are cheering when certain individuals or certain groups get what they claim is a deadly plague, a deadly disease. They're cheering. Folks, that is psychopathy. That is psychopathic behavior. And the question is, does joining that liberal mindset turn you into a psychopath? Or is that mindset so out of touch with reality of the way the world works that it attracts psychopaths? That's the big question, isn't it? I have my ideas on that. Democratic governors immediately. Watch my video, Governor Tim Walz exposes himself. Within 30 days of his stay-at-home order, he was making a case to use coronavirus as a pretense for mail-in voting. Months and months and months and months before the election. It was all about the election from day one, folks. I said it in these videos. Now you know why. Now you know what we were talking about, don't you? Let's see. School shut down to dumb down our students even more and to destroy their social skills, as I said before. Newspapers, you remember this one? The newspapers were praising dead terrorists, calling them, religious clerics and all this, Soleimani and all these. The newspapers are out there printing these obituaries for these horrible people who were thank goodness killed off, even though after they died, gee, what do you know? The terrorist attacks associated with these people went away. "2020, folks, the year of the liberal." Protests turning into riots over what instigated all these riots? It was an overdosing repeat offender criminal who died while being restrained by the police. He was restrained by the police because he was overdosing. He just tried to spend a fake $20 bill. He's committing crimes, you see. And the riots start because he died in their custody and they blame the police. Even though when you actually look at numbers, things that exist in the real world, far more white people die in police custody or are shot by them than black people. But that's only a fact. Who needs facts when you're... Who needs facts? Democrats are publicly calling to defund the police, to take away those whose job it is to protect us. The people who have one of the most dangerous jobs in the world precisely because what they're defending us against is very, very dangerous. So if they're not there, then that danger comes directly to us instead, with no buffer in between, called the police. These madmen are calling to defund those very police. Meanwhile, the same people calling for them to defund the police are themselves calling the police when they need the police. Alyssa Milano, one of these people, one of these celebrities, out there calling for people to defund the police. But then you get to hear her 911 call on there because she's afraid there's someone out there shooting and she needs the police to come and defend her. Turns out it was just a teenager with a pellet gun shooting at some squirrels. But if you're a back guano crazy celebrity and you think the world, you're so important that they're going to come after you with guns, then you might call to defund the police at 10 a.m. and then at noon call the police to save your life. You see how that works. 2020. Democrats shaming people for gathering together. Like in a church, for example, or a funeral. Your last opportunity to gather together, by the way, ever. And yet when these people get together in riots, they have no problem with it. These people are insane, folks. And 2020 made it clear to everybody. Democrats shaming people for not wearing masks while, drumroll please, they're not wearing masks. Go to YouTube. They're all over the place. Can't even count them all. The CNN reporter is wearing her mask during the press conference, and as soon as she thinks the cameras are off, and the mask comes off, and she starts walking and milling about all these people. Governor, I think it was Cuomo, right, with the ice cream out there walking down the streets of New York with no mask. Of course, the famous Nancy Pelosi, who was set up by Trump when she went to get a blowout at the hairdressers, not wearing a mask. Even after that, she's out there condemning people for not wearing masks. And these people are insane. This whole liberal group, this whole leftist, it used to be just radical leftists that were the problem. But this year we saw how much of that extends into what you might call the more mainstream or legitimate Democratic Party. We now have to look at the whole Democratic Party as that kind of a threat, because there were so many so-called normal Democrats who were not far leftists who were in favor of this kind of nonsense. This is insanity, folks. Black Lives Matter, an organization that calls itself Black Lives Matter, raising a stink all over the place about how much Black Lives matter. Except for the 50 million babies who have been aborted by their mothers, most of whom were black. Not a word from them about that, have we heard. Oh man alive. Parents being arrested on their own property in front of their children. What was their crime? That they were on their own property in front of their children. They weren't inside, staying at home. They're arrested in front of their children, little 5-6-year-old kids watching their parents taken away in handcuffs because they stepped outside their home into their yard to throw a ball with their kids. Meanwhile, remember the guy who was arrested because he was out paddleboarding on the open ocean all by himself. This is 2020, folks. What about all these bumpkins, all these uneducated nobodies who are paid millions of dollars to throw a ball back and forth, or to drive a car in circles or something like that, doing nothing that matters to anybody, just the most worthless, useless contributions to society one could ever imagine, and they're paid millions and millions and millions of dollars for this. And what do? They kneel during our national anthem. They disrespect our flag, and they accuse all Americans, not just some, but all Americans, including you and me, of being horrible, awful, terrible people who oppress them. You know, the uneducated, idiotic, brainless, useless people who get paid millions of dollars a year to throw a ball back and forth. We're oppressing them, you see. That includes all of the Americans who go out and actually work for a living, doing something productive, for a paycheck that barely allows them to maintain a home and to take care of their family. But it's these guys who are being oppressed, you see. Colin Kaepernick et al. The leaders of professional sports, the people who run professional basketball and baseball and football, actually caving into this idiocy out of just nothing but fear of political correctness. They're not even men. They're supposedly sports. We're in athletics. We're hoo-ha, hoo-ha. Look at us. We're the big tough guys. We can throw a ball back and forth. These guys own these football teams and baseball teams, basketball teams. They're the heads of the NBA and all this stuff, right? You tell me, does a man stand up to political correctness, or does a man kneel down before political correctness? These aren't men. These are barely even human beings. They've been so deprived of rational thought that other than their body, their behavior is almost indistinguishable from that of an animal. An animal that you can treat like a lab rat and just manipulate and make them go wherever you want them to go. These politically correct leftists, these woke lunatics, took these millionaire, billionaire team owners right where they want them to go. Just let them along on a leash. Is that a man? Or is that an animal in a human body? That's 2020, folks. How about cancel culture? Attempting to destroy the lives. Destroy the very lives. The fruits of their entire life's work, all their labor. Destroy it all. Just burn it to the ground. Why? Because you disagree with them. What, did you think I was going to say more? That's the reason. It's just because they disagree with them. That's why they destroy their entire lives. It's cancel culture. 2020. Rioting, looters, destroying, taking over property, while Democratic leaders do absolutely nothing to protect the American people. The only ones they're taking steps to protect are themselves. Remember the mayor, what was it, Portland or Seattle? She's all in favor of these riots and Chaz and all this until they came over to her house. Then all of a sudden she wanted to pass some laws to stop them. Democratic leaders, I emphasize. Now let's get into the election itself. How about the most pathetic presidential candidate probably in American history? I'm not absolutely familiar with every single election, but I've done a lot of study over my life of American history. I thought Michael Dukakis was about as bad as it was going to get, and then of course you had now his name escapes me, from Utah, the turncoat. I'm not going to waste my time trying to remember his name. It isn't worth it. That's probably why I forgot it. These guys were really lame, but this Biden was the most pathetic candidate. I can't even imagine. His mind is decaying right in front of our eyes. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry about... My father died of Alzheimer's. Believe me, I am sorry. I hope he doesn't have Alzheimer's. It's a horrible thing. But the fact is, he's got dementia, and it's getting worse. He's not going to be president for long, folks, if he gets in. This is the candidate that these people who were behind everything I just described, all this lunacy of 2020, every bit of it came from Democrats, right? All of it. All of it. And the best person they could come up with was a guy who has dementia, who has been called the most corrupt politician in American history. Caught with his hands all over the place. And I don't even want to go there at this point. Right in front of our eyes, he's losing his mind on a daily basis. And that's who they put up as their leader of the free world. This guy mounted the most half-hearted and unenthusiastic presidential campaign I've ever seen. It was as if he wasn't even trying to win the election. He hardly went anywhere. He hardly did anything. There was no enthusiasm anywhere. He's so inarticulate, and every time he opens his mouth, he makes a mistake, usually a very embarrassing mistake. There's just nothing to that campaign. It's just like this placeholder. It's like they just took this cardboard cutout and they put it on a bus and drive it to the next city and display the cardboard cutout. And just, what was that? Meanwhile, Trump's out there going all over the place, flying here and there, these rallies, screaming, waving flags and signs and driving in boats and just hearty enthusiasm everywhere. And Biden's just this cardboard cutout that they're shuffling from one city to another sometimes. And who knows where he's hiding all the other times. The laptop computer comes out with President, I don't even want to say that, Joe Biden's son, Hunter. His laptop comes out, a whistleblower comes out, and there's a lot of other strong evidence that what's on that computer demonstrates and proves that Joe Biden is compromised, specifically, among others, by the communist Chinese government, wrapped around his finger. Taking money from all the... You see, in communism, the state owns everything. You see, you don't have private property. You don't have your own business. The state owns everything, including businesses. So if he's doing these deals that get money from companies in China, it's from the government, because they're the same thing. That's what communism is, if you weren't aware. So this guy is so compromised, the Chinese government could tell him to do whatever they want, right? To me, I'm not even sure that's the worst of it. The rest of it is too unsubstantiated for me to talk about, but if you've had any concerns with all these videos and photographs of Biden touching little girls and sniffing women's hair, if that makes you uncomfortable when you see that, you might want to research this yourself to see what else was on Hunter Biden's laptop, because it ain't pretty, folks. But I'm not going to talk about it because it hasn't really been proven and substantiated enough. I am not here to spread mistruths, but given what else is on that hard drive that is demonstrable, the question needs to be asked. Alright, we had a half-hearted, unenthusiastic presidential candidate who refused to tell what his platform was. He refused to tell anybody what he's going to do as president. He would come right out and say, I'll tell you after I'm president. Are you going to stack the Supreme Court, Mr. Biden? I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about that. After I'm president, I'll tell you. Do you understand how a campaign works? A campaign is where you tell people what you will do if you're elected. And people make the decision whether to vote for you based on what you told them you will do. But if you don't tell them what you're going to do, on what basis should they vote for you? There's nothing there, right? The only thing left is, I don't want that person to win, so I'm going to vote for you. That's the only thing left, right? And that's so irresponsible. No, not even the leftist-leaning American would ever do something that irresponsible, would they? To maybe bring in someone who's controlled by communist China in order to get rid of the bad orange man. How about big tech? Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all that, out there testifying before Congress that they are not censoring. They are not censoring conservatives. Even as, while they're there giving their testimony, Facebook and YouTube and Twitter are censoring and deplatforming and banning and shadow banning only conservatives. I always thought that was purge. Sorry, my camera shut down as it so often does in my videos. It's hard to keep the battery charged and it from overheating, although today's not an overheating problem, it's actually very, very cold. Next, in 2020, there were calls to end the Nobel Prize, specifically the Nobel Peace Prize, after Donald Trump is nominated some 4 times for the Nobel Peace Prize. Why was he nominated? Well, it had something to do with him bringing peace to the Middle East. All these peace agreements that were signed between Israel and other countries that, if you know the history of Israel, it's only been around 70 years, all these countries kept attacking Israel, which isn't very peaceful. People die, people get injured, people live in fear and terror of rockets landing on them. You see, Donald Trump created peace agreements which his predecessors, going back to the founding of Israel, had failed to accomplish. So he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And what did the liberals do in 2020? What did they do? We need to end the Nobel Peace Prize! This is totally illegitimate! What a bogus prize! You know, the prize that was given to Barack Obama when he was elected president, even though he had not done anything. I, from this car, have literally accomplished more than Barack Obama had at that point. The stuff I've created on here, the junk science videos, the collating of information, the presentation of that kind of knowledge that you're just not going to get unless you go out and spend years researching it like I have, is of so much value to you. He, as a senator, when he became president, had done nothing. No legislation. He had done nothing except open and close his mouth a few times. And they put him up there for some reason to run for president. And he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Why? Because he was not George W. Bush. And they had no complaints about that at all. It's like, bravo, bravo, Mr. Obama. But when Trump is nominated 4 times for actually bringing peace, which is what the Peace Prize is for, you see where I'm going. These people are loony. Abundant liberal meltdowns that clearly demonstrate just how mentally ill and out of control and dangerous these radical leftists really are. And again, one thing 2020 has showed all of us, myself included, we've all learned a very important lesson, and we can never forget it. It is not just radical leftists who are this insane. It goes far more into mainstream liberalism than any of us ever thought it did, doesn't it? And that should scare us all. Because everything I'm describing that's gone on in 2020 is a result of those people. It ain't the people listening to Rush Limbaugh who are behind all this, folks. Pollsters claiming, you remember pollsters like the ones, the ones who guaranteed you that Hillary Clinton was going to be president in 2016, those pollsters. They were claiming that Biden was going to win by a landslide. A landslide. Even though, as they're saying this, in the same period, I think it was like a 6-week period, Donald Trump had rallies with 250,000 people. 250,000 people cheering, waving flags, just going berserk. In that same period, Biden's rallies brought in 83 people across a country of 400 million people. Remember that when I tell you who the media declared as the winner of this election. It wasn't the guy who had 250,000 people cheering and screaming for him. It was the guy who had 83 people. Remember that. It might help you understand what just happened on November 3rd. Chris Wallace, who brings so much shame to... See, I grew up with his father, Mike Wallace, as one of the media people that I would see. And he just brings shame to his family. I mean, it's just so sad to watch. Not that there haven't always been left-leaning or media who have bias, but everyone has a bias. That's just natural, and sometimes it even shows through if you try to be objective. But that's different than just being an agenda pusher, being a liberal activist who pretends to be a member of the media, which is what Mike Wallace's son has done. Shame on you, Chris Wallace. How dare you do that to your father's memory? He moderates a presidential debate where not only does Joe Biden debate the president, such as that was, but Chris Wallace is debating the president. How objective is that? You've got the two candidates and Chris Wallace. He's supposed to be moderating these guys debating each other so we can evaluate them, and he keeps going after Trump himself. And yet Trump stood tall through it with everybody attacking him from every direction, as he has throughout his whole presidency. Bravo, Mr. President. You talk about setting a good example for young people. Standing up to that kind of pressure for 4 years without cracking. Bravo, Mr. Trump. That's what I want the next generation to see. I don't want them to see these people who are caving in and going down on their knees with a leash because Black Lives Matter told them to. I want them to see a leader like that. That's how we get a generation of people who can save this country instead of giving it away. Unprecedented apathy for Joe Biden. Just nobody cared. As you drive around this country, there's no signs for Joe Biden. None. There's signs everywhere for Trump. And yet, if you have a Trump sign, there's a good chance that you're going to suffer some kind of criminal activity. At the very least, they're going to steal and destroy your sign, but they might even, like they did here in Minnesota, burn down your house. And yet, despite that, the enthusiasm for Biden was so low that there's no signs. Nobody's going to hurt you if you have a Biden sign out there. Do you see the disparity? Yet the media says that the guy with no signs, who nobody cares about at all, just won, and you'll see with what kind of numbers. Greater numbers than anyone's ever had before. Does that make any rational sense to you? The same candidate, Joe Biden, he picks, for his running mate for vice president, he picks the worst loser of the primaries, the person who was kicked out of the primaries first because nobody liked her. Just nobody could stand her. And that's who he picks. This snotty and snooty and smarmy, this entitled adult child. I'm sorry, to me it says Kamala Harris, but she pronounces it Kamala. Because you see liberal, NPR, leftists, it's got to be pretentious, right? Isn't that right, Dr. Frankenstein? It's Frankenstein. Even Biden called her Kamala. I mean, come on, folks. This is lunacy. Even Biden called her Kamala. Oh my God, 2020. 2020. Oh. What was Harris's main accomplishment? What is she most known for in her entire life's career? It is imprisoning the most black men of any prosecutor, I think in California, and preventing them from being released on time. In other words, keeping them in prison so the prison keeps having this slave labor. I haven't really talked about the problems with American prisons yet on this channel. I hope the day comes because there's some serious problems. That's what she did. And they claim that they call her a black woman. You know, I'm going to have a black woman for my running mate. Her main accomplishment in life is doing more damage to black men than anyone else has. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. You couldn't, there is no, Shakespeare couldn't come up with this one. It's 2020. All right, now here's where it gets a little bit serious. You may not know this stuff. The attorney for Kamala, whatever, Harris, the attorney for Harris's own presidential campaign, the one that went, flushed down counterclockwise into the sewer system because nobody liked her. The attorney for that campaign is also the attorney for, drumroll, the Democratic Governors Association. You know, people like Governor Tim Walz, the guy whose targeted stay-at-home order cost me my job, but nobody else's job in my company, only the homeless person. Her attorney was the same attorney for that association. He also works with Hillary Clinton, and he's likely about to be indicted by the Justice Department because guess what? He's also one of the, if not the, main figure behind this entire Russian collusion hoax, the Steele dossier, that led to almost all of Donald Trump's first term being completely wasted on this stupid, pointless, baseless impeachment. The guy who was responsible for that was Kamala, whatever, Harris's campaign attorney. Do you kind of see where the pattern is now? And he's also for the Democratic Governors Association. Do you start to see what's really going on here? Because it was Democratic governors who allowed what happened on Tuesday, November 3rd. Starting to see a pattern here, folks. As I said before, Project Veritas releases, this was on the day of the second presidential debate. I think it was. It might have been before that. I'm sorry. Not absolutely sure. But Project Veritas released the video, the hidden video of Ilhan Omar's campaign people illegally ballot harvesting. Now, normally, if you have a valid news media that actually tells people about this stuff, what would normally happen is a vehicle with a flashing light on it would drive over to Ilhan Omar's house, and people who are in handcuffs would be leaving in that car that has the red flashing light on it. That's what would normally happen, because ballot harvesting is a crime. It's treason. But instead, the media never told anybody about it. But you can go watch the video yourself. Search for it. Ilhan Omar, Project Veritas. It's that simple. It's that simple. That's all you have to do to overcome everything that they're doing through the media here. Let's see. So, again, Joe Biden runs the most casual presidential campaign ever. He doesn't even seem to care whether he wins or loses. Doesn't seem to be trying to win. And yet, all of his words keep saying things like, I'm going to win whether you vote for me or not. Isn't that really strange? Who would say something like that? I mean, look at the things came out of their mouths. Biden said, and I'm sorry I don't have the specific quotes, I live in a car, but he said, I'm paraphrasing, I don't care whether you vote for me or not, I'm still going to win. Okay, well maybe he's just really confident and he's saying, oh, even if you vote for Trump, it doesn't matter, I'm still going to win the election. Okay, fine, maybe that. But then what about when the Trump people came and kind of stood off to the side making noise because there were so many more of him than there were people at Biden's rally that you couldn't even hear Biden, and he started saying, you know, well, I'm going to be everyone's president, including the president of those chumps over there. Now, what about that one? Because if you're Joe Biden and you're at a rally where there's 6 people and there's 2,000 Trump supporters out there, because you can't conjure up any enthusiasm whatsoever for you, yet the Trump supporters are enthusiastic even when Trump isn't even there, the evidence seems to show that you don't have a prayer of a chance of winning this election at all, and yet you're sitting there with confidence, almost yawning, oh, I'm going to be the president for everybody, including those chumps over there. It's almost like you know something that nobody else knows, isn't it? Because you know what a chump is? A chump is a sucker. It's one of those old words from the 1930s. Something that someone as old as Biden would know. If you're a chump, you're a sucker. Well, who are they being suckered by? Is it by President Trump? Don't think so. The guy's as straight a shooter as they come. But maybe they're going through all of that activity for nothing, because the election's already stolen. Maybe that's why they're a bunch of chumps. And maybe that's why Joe Biden can just stand there and basically yawn them away and not care and have absolute confidence he's going to win the election anyway. What about Nancy Pelosi? Does anybody remember when she said that we have many arrows in our quiver that I'm not going to talk about right now? Gee, I wonder what those arrows were. What could they possibly be? Since they don't have anything on Trump, they've tried for 4 years and they can't come up with anything, what could those arrows be? Huh. It's almost like she knows something that we didn't know. What about when Pelosi allegedly said, and I have not been able to confirm this one to my satisfaction yet, but I've confirmed it enough to where I'm okay repeating it with that caveat. It's attributed to Pelosi that she said, no matter what the outcome of the election, Joe Biden will be inaugurated in January. What does that even mean? No matter the outcome of the election, Joe Biden... What if the outcome of the election is that Donald Trump wins by a landslide? Then how would Joe Biden be inaugurated in January? That doesn't make any rational sense. Unless, of course, she knows something that maybe we didn't know. Joe Biden blatantly lies all the time. He's caught all the time. I never said that. And then there's, 20 videos or 10, 20, 3, 4, 5, 6, 20 videos of him saying exactly what he said. I never said that. I mean, the fracking's a great example, in the debates, he's saying, they're talking about how he keeps saying he's going to end fracking and end fossil fuels. I never said that. Just blatantly lying. And then all you have to do is go do a search and you can watch video after video after video after video until you're sick of watching him say, I'm going to end fracking. I'm going to get rid of fossil fuels over and over and over again. The man just lies through his teeth, which has been his history for 47 years in government. Now let's look at this a little more closely in Pennsylvania in particular, since Pennsylvania is the one where you're seeing these 13 steps that I described the most prominently. There are several other states that had it going on, and I do believe there were several states that were prepared to do it if they needed to, including this corrupt monstrosity I'm stuck in, Minnesota. But Pennsylvania is the one where it's just so blatantly obvious what happened there. All right, let's look at the facts. Biden has blatantly lied about when he says he's not going to try to end fossil fuels or fracking. The state of Pennsylvania, what is their main industry? What is Pennsylvania known for? Old 97 went in the wrong hole now. My number's 60, there's blood on the coal. A fossil fuel, coal. What sane presidential candidate goes into Pennsylvania and says, I'm going to end fossil fuels, the basis of your economy, the basis of what gives you money to eat with, to feed your family, to have a home, so that you don't live homeless on the streets begging for scraps of bread from people. I'm going to end your entire industry that undermines your entire economy in this state, and has since its founding. What sane candidate goes into a state and does? It would be like going to Los Angeles, speaking in front of all these Hollywood people and saying, I vow to end film in America. No more films. We will not allow it. We will not tolerate it. And all the celebrities are like, oh, he's not Donald Trump. I'm voting for him. Does that make any rational sense at all? That would be like a candidate going up to Silicon Valley and talking to all the Silicon Valley executives and saying, I'm in favor of getting rid of all technology. I am a Luddite. We shouldn't have any kind of technology whatsoever. And the heads of Facebook and Google and Twitter, oh, I'm voting for you. I'm voting for you because you're not Donald Trump, and I can't allow Donald Trump to win. Does that make any rational sense? Who goes to Pennsylvania and says, I'm going to get rid of coal, and wins Pennsylvania? How is that possible? Would you please tell me how that's possible? Especially when your running mate, however you want to pronounce her name, your running mate also is totally against fossil fuels, and you bring in this, I'm sorry, I'm not in pop culture. I don't know if it's a guy or a girl, but this Lady Gaga thing, this Lady Gaga came in with Biden. Just one of the creepiest things. I don't understand this. I don't understand celebrities these days. But this guy or girl or whatever this is, they're really loudmouth opponent to fracking fossil fuels. So you've got a candidate who's against the basis of Pennsylvania's economy. His running mate is against the basis of their economy. They've announced they want to destroy that basis of their economy. They bring in the celebrity who's against the basis of Pennsylvania's economy. The state attorney general in Pennsylvania, which is notoriously corrupt, like the Chicago political machine, Pennsylvania has something similar. And if you know about politics, you know that, right? Democratic, by the way. The state attorney general for that state came out before the election and said Biden's going to win Pennsylvania no matter what. How does that happen? The same state attorney general refused to allow Republican certified poll watchers to monitor the elections for fraud. Who refuses, who's running a legitimate election, who refuses to allow people to be there and make sure that there's no fraud? Why would you do that if there's no fraud? It doesn't make any rational sense. In fact, it seems counterproductive, because if you're not committing fraud but you don't allow them in, then there's legitimate reasons why people can claim that you're committing fraud, even though you're not. Why would you do that? There's only one reason you would do that, especially in a visible presidential election. If you're committing fraud, you see how that works, right? The corrupt Democratic legislature, state legislature, they allowed mail-in votes without signatures. So in other words, anybody can just mail in votes. They can just print them off on their printer, put them in an envelope, hand them off, print another one, mail them off, print them in, just put some scrawl on there, and there's no signature matching. So as long as you mail it in, it gets counted. Does that make any rational sense to you? It almost seems like, oh, I don't know, somebody's looking to stuff the ballot box, doesn't it? Because I'm pretty sure it isn't Trump supporters who are sitting there printing off votes. They're certainly not printing out votes for Biden and sending them in the kind of numbers we saw in Pennsylvania. All right. When the election finally came, what did we see? We saw exactly what reality would dictate. A president who comes in and says, I'm going to protect your industry. I'm going to protect the way that you feed your family and clothe your family and the way that you maintain your home so you're not living out on the streets. I'm going to support that. It's Biden who is against everything that underlies your economy. Get rid of coal, get rid of fossil fuels, fracking. It seems pretty plausible, given all the enthusiasm for Trump in Pennsylvania, that he was going to win Pennsylvania. And what do you know? When they started counting ballots in the election, Trump was winning Pennsylvania. Exactly what you would expect. And then it got to a certain point where you could kind of, you know how those curves work? They start out and they kind of take off. They might have a jiggle or two depending on counties. There might be a more Democratic or Republican county. You can have these anomalies. But for the most part, when you understand mathematics, you can, from the curve, you can tell where it's going to end up. And at that point, the counting stopped. It just stopped inexplicably. And then several hours later, enough time to say, call in for X number of boxes of Biden ballots from, I don't know, Reading, whatever the closest city is that has a distribution center for Biden votes. And then, after that period of time, all of a sudden they start counting again, and what do you know? All the votes from then on are for Biden. And you saw pretty much the same thing in several other states, these contested states. If you want to know why Donald Trump is not conceding the election, that is the reason why, folks. Or do you believe that Joe Biden, the guy who said, I'm going to destroy the very industry that makes Pennsylvania what it is and you feed your family with, I'm going to destroy it. Do you think that all those people in Pennsylvania voted for that man? The guy who's got dementia, who has the worst running mate probably in American history, the most offensive, unlikable, unliked running mate, who, by the way, up until she became his running mate, she said that she agreed with the women who accused Joe Biden of basically being a sex offender. You remember? You remember that? Kamala or whatever her name is, Harris, said, I believe the women who were making these accusations against Biden. At least until she became his running mate, and then all of a sudden, she never had a word to say about it again, did she? You're telling me everybody in Pennsylvania voted for that? In some counties, 105% of the people voted for Biden. Isn't that amazing? And I made that number up. Don't even for a minute think I'm being a specific number. But there were places in the country that had voting numbers that exceeded the actual number of registered voters in that county. And that indicates fraud, doesn't it? And yet the mass media is telling us that there's no fraud whatsoever. They haven't investigated anything. To investigate something like that takes time by definition. It's a national election for the leader of the free world. Nearly 8 billion people on the face of the earth have a vested interest in who wins this election. And the mass media declared it for one of the candidates within minutes of when these fraudulent ballots started being counted. They started announcing it. Maybe not officially, but they were making it clear Biden was the winner. They had that electoral count up there within like six points of 270. Something that important, and our mass media is basically pushing Biden the whole way and freaking out if there's even a small anomaly where Trump gains a little bit temporarily. Folks, this is how you steal an election in America. And the problem is, there's a lot of problems with it, to be honest. Not the least of which is the fact that you have every right for your vote to matter. If you're going to go through the effort of evaluating this candidate and that candidate and that candidate, and you're going to decide which one you think is best, and you really truly feel that, whether it's Biden or Trump, I don't even care. I don't care. As long as you feel that you've done a good job of evaluating it and you're not just voting against that person, you're voting for somebody who you really want to be president, you go cast your vote, as is your constitutional right. You know, the right that was denied me as a homeless person in Minnesota, not allowed to vote. But you have that right. Just like my ancestors who fought for all of us to have that right had that right. Only I don't have that right in Minnesota because I'm homeless. Or didn't you know that? That's one less Trump vote right there, which means a fraudulent election in Minnesota by definition, right then and there. I was not allowed to cast my vote. If Americans cannot go through all of that and cast their vote and know for a fact that that vote was counted, their candidate may win, their candidate may not win, but their vote was counted. They were granted that human dignity. If you take that away from an election, like they did here, they're taking it away not just from the people in Pennsylvania. They're taking it away from every voter in the United States of America. And that's far more than 71 million people. They're taking it away from every human being on the face of the earth, all of whom are in some way affected by who sits in the White House. The people who are behind this coup attempt are guilty of one of the worst crimes in human history. You think 9/11 was bad? 9/11 was a horrific terrorist event, but it was isolated. A lot of people died, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of fear and terror in people. But I was an adult when that happened. I saw it, and I saw what came of it. This is fundamentally different. This is destroying the very fabric of what we have sought as a species since the Magna Carta was signed. The right and the dignity for human beings to be equal to their leaders. Not the leaders are up on a throne and I'm better than you, and if I say off with your head comes off. No. Ever since the Magna Carta, you get due process before your head comes off. And it's a fair due process. Doesn't mean it always gets it right. Sometimes it gets it wrong. OJ got away with it. But for the most part, the system works fantastically well, given the complexities of having 8 billion people on the face of the earth, doesn't it? And these people just stole that from all of you. Now, if you've got Trump derangement syndrome, and you're one of these loonies who force me to do this whenever I think about 2020 and all the things I listed, I don't care what you think. You're off your rocker. You're irrelevant. You've got to at least be rooted in reality before your opinion means anything. But for the rest of you who I'm actually speaking to here, you need to stand up for this president, even if you don't like this president, you need to stand up for him, because it isn't about whether he wins or loses. It's about him fulfilling his legal responsibility as president to ensure that your vote was fairly counted, even if your vote is for his competitor, even if Biden ends up winning as a result of this. If that happens, if it's a legitimate election and Biden wins, guess what? Trump is going to concede and he's going to leave the Oval Office just like every president before him always did. You know he will. We all know he will. But he ain't going nowhere with this election, because this is the most fraudulent thing we have ever seen. And I hope after watching this video you have a better idea of why it's so fraudulent and how it isn't as isolated as it might first appear. Remember, I was warning about this kind of thing back in, April? And I saw what was going on in March, but I didn't say it until that one video with Governor Walz in April. But I saw what was going on, because I've seen this before. Remember, coronavirus is anti-smoking 2.0, and I've been studying the anti-smoking fraud for 30 years. Maybe I'll make a video on that to finally make that point clear. Folks, this is a horrific thing that we are witnessing right now. I couldn't care less if Biden wins or not. Like I said in my last video, God's in control of everything. It doesn't matter. But it makes me sick to my stomach to think that our dignity could be attacked collectively, as a nation, as a family. Whether we vote for Biden or vote for Trump, it doesn't matter. We're part of the same country. All of us were attacked on this day, November 3rd, 2020. All of us were attacked when they took away the dignity of our vote by someone like Governor Walz not allowing me to vote at all, like my ancestors could, and rendering your vote absolutely meaningless by throwing in all those fake ballots. And I'm going to leave it at that so this video doesn't go on too much longer, alright? I'll just leave you with one last memory of, one last thing to think about with Joe Biden. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll fight with us, folks. No matter what side you're on, I hope you will fight to make sure that this election is fair, no matter who ends up in the White House on January. Thank you so much.
Last year, in an interview, Joe bragged about getting Ukraine's general prosecutor fired. He says he was standing up to corruption.
I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko. They would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, what, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
Well, it just so happens that the general prosecutor was investigating an energy firm in which Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was heavily invested. Burisma Holdings is an energy corporation in Ukraine, and Hunter Biden, the son of the former vice president, has made a rather handsome profit from it, especially in the aftermath of the 2014 events in Ukraine, in which pro-EU forces took power. That prosecutor was looking into 3 different instances of foul play from Hunter's cash cow. However, all it took was a phone call from Papa Joe, and that prosecutor was out.
We had plans that included interrogations and other crime investigation procedures into all members of the executive board, including Hunter Biden.
By the way, you know, I sit on the stand and it get hot. I got hairy legs that turn turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.